So far, Dovetail Games have made 2 train sim world routes that venture into Austria, but they are both cross-border routes that go into Germany, and barely any of the second route, Salzburg to Rosenheim, is actually in Austria. The route we're looking at today is the first 100% Austrian route in TSW, but it's not even an original concept. That's our Dovetail, I guess. The Semmeringbahn add-on was released on April 18th, 2024, appearing as the 19th here in New Zealand due to time zone differences. Yet again, we have a TSW route that costs a ludicrous 57 New Zealand dollars at full price. The option to pre-order the route didn't launch until April 11, but you only got a measly 10% discount if you took out a pre-order. The line is famous for the difficult terrain through which it runs. Indeed, it's apparently the world's first true mountain railway. The 41km or 26-mile long Mürzzuschlag and Gloggnitz section is very slow, windy and steeply graded, with numerous tunnels and bridges along the way, and the gradient gets as steep as 1 in 40. This is like a more scenic version of the main Spessartbahn, a route that we've had in TSW for around 5 years now, although that doesn't mean the MSB is bad. Speaking of the concept of mountain railways, I'd quite like to see the Snowdon Mountain Railway in TSW, or any narrow gauge mountain line with a rack and pinion system, for that matter. If Dovetail or a third-party developer made the Manitou and Pikes Peak Railway in the USA, or the Mount Pilatus Railway in Switzerland, as a TSW add-on, that would be pretty damn impressive. As I alluded to earlier, this is not an original route concept, because we already have the Mürzzuschlag and Gloggnitz section in TS Classic. Dovetail's creative bankruptcy has been getting on my nerves for a fair while now, because a sizable number of the recent TSW routes are just remakes, or in some cases, partial remakes, of old routes that we already have in TS Classic, instead of routes that we've never seen in the older game before. For once, the Semmeringbahn is an exception to the rule, in a sense, because Dovetail didn't cut the route coverage at Gloggnitz again. Instead, they extended it a further 27 kilometers, or 16.7 miles, to Wiener Neustadt Hauptbahnhof. Despite the welcome addition of the Gloggnitz to Wiener Neustadt section, I'm still a little peeved by this route's linear nature, and I want to see more non-linear routes in this game. For example, something like Portadown to Londonderry and Portrush via Belfast, in Northern Ireland. It's the usual story where only one quote-unquote new form of motive power is included with the route. This is the Österreichische Bundesbahn in Class 1116 Taurus electric locomotive, a member of the Siemens Eurosprinter family. She's very similar to the Deutsche Bahn BR182 that we've already had in the game since April 2019, but her cab interior is distinctly different from the BR182. And I was expecting a hasty/lazy reskin of the existing BR182 with absolutely no changes to the model at all. Although the Österreichische Bundesbahn in Class 1116 in-game is listed as a different engine from the BR182, it's clear that Dovetail didn't create a whole new model for the 1116. And I think it was a bit of a cop-out for them to just include another variant of an engine we already have, instead of adding something new to the game like, for example, the Österreichische Bundesbahn in Class 1144. To be fair, it's good to see that Dovetail did at least update the audio for this locomotive, and I think she sounds better than the original BR182. And here is a demonstration of the iconic musical-esque traction motor sounds. Rather than going the extra mile and adding a new Austrian EMU that we haven't seen in TSW yet, Dovetail took an option that's more convenient for them and just reused the Class 4024 Talent 1 from S-Bahn Vorarlberg on the Semmeringbahn. I'm disappointed in the absence of the Österreichische Bundesbahn in Class 4744, and especially the Railjet, for that matter. I get that the Talent 1 does run on this line in real life, but the route still doesn't look right without the Class 4744 and Railjet stock. I'm not at all happy to see Dovetail reusing the Talent 1, not just because of the reused sounds from the Talent 2, which sounds nothing like a Talent 1, but also because this is now the second time they've bundled this unit with a route after her debut in S-Bahn Vorarlberg. The first time they did this was on Salzburg to Rosenheim, but I have absolutely no interest in that route, so I haven't got it. For context, the Railjet is a premium high-speed passenger service operated by Österreichische Bundesbahnen themselves, and part of its route involves the Semmeringbahn, or at least Wiener Neustadt. Aside from the services in Austria, the Railjet also goes across the borders into Germany, Italy, Czechia, Slovakia, and Hungary. As for rolling stock, it's all Siemens built, with Viaggio comfort coaches and cab cars hauled by either one of two Taurus variants, the Class 1116 and Class 1216, although the Railjet 1116s have a number of modifications from the standard 1116. As for the 1216, or Siemens ES64U4, this one doesn't make the same iconic musical-esque traction motor sound heard on the 1116, and she is capable of running on 4 different electrification systems instead of only 1 or 2. It's also worth mentioning that the 1216 has a different cab door placement from the 1116. In the case of the 1216, you don't need to go through the middle of the engine room in order to access the cab. Dovetail barely included any passenger rolling stock with this route, only the second-class variant of the Bmz or Eurofima coaches, which makes the Taurus's passenger trains look rather unrealistic. Apparently, Dovetail were on too big of a time crunch to add the missing first-class and restaurant variants, but I think that's just a feeble excuse to try and justify their intensive release schedule. Probably goes without saying, but I think they should reduce the frequency of their add-on releases, because a lot of people are sick and tired of all these lazy and subpar products, not to mention Dovetail's feeble explanations for major problems, if and when they ever actually acknowledge the fact that there's something wrong with the DLC. Timetable mode includes 155 services for the Taurus and 100 for the Talent 1. The Taurus is used to haul freight or passenger services, and the latter are labelled with either an EC or RJ prefix, and I take those to mean Eurocity and Railjet respectively. If my guess for the latter is right, then it's quite on the nose because it only makes the absence of proper Railjet stock even more frustrating. It just looks stupid to see a bog-standard 1116 and Eurofima coaches running what is actually meant to be a Railjet service. That would be like if Dovetail, or a third-party developer, made the Wrexham Central to Bidston line in TSW and included the West Midlands Class 196 instead of the prototypical Transport for Wales Class 230 or Class 197. As for the Class 4024 Talent 1, she is used on R91 or CJX9 services between Wiener Neustadt and Mürzzuschlag, although most of the CJX9 services only go as far as Peierbach-Reichenau. As expected, these services have a more intensive stopping pattern than the locomotive-hauled trains. It's one thing to not include the Class 4744 EMU, but Dovetail could have at least included a CityJet livery for the Class 4024, since some Talent 1s do wear that livery in real life, instead of just giving us the standard livery again. Sometimes you'll see wagons parked in non-electrified sidings, such as these ones at Neunkirchen. But there are no shunting services available for you to operate because we don't have any Austrian diesel locomotives in the game yet. All the freight services on this route are just bland A to B and B to A runs along the main line. And as much as I don't like the limited motive power offering, at least the schedule is reasonably busy. In stark contrast to the speedy Gloggnitz to Wiener Neustadt section, The mountain section west of Gloggnitz and over to Mürzzuschlag is quite challenging. Besides the steep gradients that I mentioned earlier, you have to deal with speed limits averaging between just 50 and 70 km per hour, while the Gloggnitz to Wiener Neustadt section has a speed limit going as high as 160 km an hour. Besides the default Austrian motive power, you can also drive the Railpool BR193 Vectron on the Semmeringbahn in timetable mode, but she appears to just be a substitute for the Taurus on freight services. Weirdly, the BR103 from Link Rheinstrecke has one playable service on this route as well. There's also a silly rail tour service operated by the British Rail Class 47 of all locomotives, and this is the variant from the Blackpool branches route. Although you can still drive it in any season, the rail tour will only appear if you set the month to June or July when you spawn at a station on foot. It is completely unrealistic for this particular variant of the Class 47 to run in Austria, and the vast majority of Class 47s for that matter, and in this case this is a 1980s era model on a modern image route. And this thing doesn't have any of the continental European safety systems, only British ones. And it's also a very crude recreation of the real-life rail tours operated by 47375, a preserved Class 47 that, for whatever reason, was exported to Hungary in 2015. Curiously, there is photographic evidence out there that shows the ruddy thing running on the Semmeringbahn in 2018. As much as I hate gameplay packs, I can still see an opportunity for Dovetail, or some other developer, to make one with 47375 in her current livery for the Semmeringbahn, provided that it doesn't cost more than £3. One time, I was driving a pair of Talent 1s on the 1023 CJX9 service out of Peierbach-Reichenau. I couldn't complete this service because of an AI train stuck at a broken signal outside Wiener Neustadt, which was holding up a locomotive hauled service as well as mine. The last time I remember seeing a broken signal bug was on the New York to Trenton route, and even though the bug is quite rare, it's still shocking to ever see it slip through to the final product. That's our Dovetail, I guess. After that failure, I tried driving a different CJX9 service to see if it could actually be completed. The second attempt was on the 1223 departure out of Peierbach-Reichenau, and this time, all the signals into Wiener Neustadt actually worked properly with no trains getting held up indefinitely. The frame rates are annoyingly inconsistent throughout the route. On my end, it mostly runs at between 50 and 70 FPS, which is far below the other routes that often run at around 100 FPS. But the frame rate then plummets down to around 30 FPS at Wiener Neustadt Hauptbahnhof due to the increased number of trains present. Not helping the situation was the frequent stuttering I noticed between Gloggnitz and Wiener Neustadt. It was reminiscent of, but not as bad as, what I experienced on New York to Trenton. The recent London Overground route has working lifts at a few stations, and I bring this up because, for whatever reason, Dovetail didn't bother adding working lifts to the Semmeringbahn, although it wouldn't be unreasonable to expect functional lifts on routes released after the Goblin. I question the inconsistent implementation of the working lifts, and incidentally, these non-functional assets on the Semmeringbahn look like they were reused from one of the existing German routes. For some reason, one of the NPC spawn points is in a random shelter, but you'll see this shelter reused at several stations throughout the route. I thought spawn points were meant to be hidden away in areas the players couldn't access. As I was exploring the route, I noticed little extra details on the NPCs, instead of the usual story where they're just standing around doing nothing, sitting on a bench, or holding an umbrella in the rain. Wait, what? So, let me get this straight. Dovetail spouted some bullshit about not having enough time to add the first class and restaurant variants of the Eurofima coaches, as if that would go down well with the community. But they did have time to add these little details to the NPCs, like backpacks whose straps glitch through the owner's torso, realistic sound effects when they move pages in a newspaper, holding a laptop that glitches through the arm, and someone trying to type on a laptop in a realistic manner, and, at least one station, someone with his arm around his companion. How many people actually wanted these kinds of tiny features that you'll barely notice unless you're actively looking for them? There's also a little scene at Eichberg with an injured walker and one of his mates on the phone to an ambulance crew. In a way, this is a good bit of detail, since it references the numerous walking trails in the area, but it's largely pointless given that you can't see it from the driver's cab, and how often are you going to walk down the path from the station? In real life, there is a vintage railcar on display at Semmering station. This is an Österreichische Bundesbahn in class 5144, but she'll only appear in the game if you unlock her as a mastery reward. Speaking of diesel railcars, and just diesels in general, I don't want to see Dovetail games only making electrified routes whenever they venture into Austria in the future. And if that is what they end up doing, then I might not buy any more add-ons that are based in Austria. Meanwhile, further along the line, there's supposed to be an Österreichische Bundesbahn in class 95 steam locomotive on display at Peyerbach-Reichenau. But for whatever reason, Dovetail didn't bother modelling this thing in-game, not even as just a static object like those narrow-gauge coaches you see at Freital-Heinsberg on Taurus ramp. It doesn't surprise me in the slightest to see all these problems with the Semmeringbahn DLC. I would laugh at this nonsense, and roast it as well, but at this point, Dovetail Games have screwed over their customers for so long that it's not funny anymore. I question when, or rather if, the silly sods from Chatham will ever see sense and change their ways for the better. Because of their practice of releasing add-ons way too quickly at the expense of quality, Dovetail Games kind of reminds me of the state of modern SML, or rather, how SML has been going for the past 7 years or so, and if you know, you know. To be fair, the DLC is not all bad, and I'll try to end the video on a more positive note. I still like the route concept and the challenging driving experience west of Gloggnitz, not to mention the improved sounds on the Österreichische Bundesbahn in class 1116. I just hope that, if or when Dovetail makes another Austrian route, it'll at least be a decent, or better yet, actually non-linear, concept with a rolling stock selection that's actually good.